Well, here's our workshop here. It's summertime. It's pretty warm. I needed to be out of the rain, and this is what we've used to build the boat in. And it worked out just fine for us. And I didn't have a lot of fancy tools. The boat was built with a skill saw, a jigsaw, a planer, a 4-inch disc grinder, and a couple of drills. And I think that's about it. And a
Misha,
welder. We had a welder too for all the
look at
fabrication
Misha
work.
go.
And I did a lot of grinding on this boat too, shaping it and fixing things. I didn't spend a lot of time with a little planer and doing these beautiful shavings. I was a little bit impatient. The boat, I thought I could build it in 3 weeks. It took me 7 weeks, and it was exhausting. So I'm grateful that it's done, but it was well worth it and a lot of fun to design and build and visualize, and it worked out about 90% of what I hoped for. But the first thing I wanted to try was to develop a boat shape without a table of offsets, without a fancy plan, and do an experiment. The boat's an experiment by having 3 locations that you know what you want in the end. One in the bow, one in the center of the boat, one in the stern. I built those 3 stations, and I even changed the plans of the boat as I went because I got afraid of if it would have enough float. Building it, I started to realize how heavy it was getting. I added about 2 inches of thickness and rebuilt this center rib station here. So it'd have 2 more inches of thickness. I added 2 inches of thickness to the stern, and I am very grateful I did that because the boat barely has enough float in the stern. It rides beautifully with 3 people in it. Someone sitting off the bow, someone in the rower seat, someone in the back seat. And it still has about 2.5, 3 inches of float here, and part of the flotation that's not used up. So the boat holds about 550 pounds. It's 8'7". But anyway, after these 3 stations were developed, I used 3/8 steel rod, and I bent the rod around the stations to develop the shape. And I had 5 rods, one on the top here, one on the bottom, one in the center, one on each side there. They were secured with wire, with concrete steel tying wire, and I tied them off to the handles here. And I discovered that the rod wasn't totally perfectly straight and fair, and it bent a little bit differently depending on the tension of the concrete, the tying wire. So I picked the best looking, most fair side to develop the whole boat shape out of. And then basically it was taking a tape measure and measuring from the top of this metal rod to the bottom of this metal rod. And then I went on the rods were right on the edge, and I measured from the outside of the rod to the inside of this rod, the keel rod, and added about 1/8 of an inch, 3/16. And then I was able to trace all the panels for it. And it worked out pretty good. It didn't work out perfectly. I don't recommend that anybody else try this because it was challenging and it saved time in some areas, but it wasted a lot of time too, checking everything and adjusting everything. So I don't recommend anybody else do it. But it worked out pretty good. The boat's pretty fair. It's not perfect. I always wanted to design my own boat my whole life, and I designed this one myself and came up with a concept. But it's risky business when you develop shape for the bottom of a small boat, especially for the family. You want something stable. And this one worked out pretty good. And it's got quite a bit of shape in the bottom of it. It's got an inch of V in the center of the boat. And it's stable enough to stand in and paddleboard in. It doesn't paddleboard very nice because it's so heavy, but it does paddleboard. When you move down to the bow, it's got 4 inches of V here, and it's got 2 inches of rocker from the center of the boat to the bow. Now the rear of the boat has 3 inches of rocker back here, and it's got 2 inches of V on the corners. And the shape worked out pretty good. It rose like a dream with one person and has a pretty good release at the back. And it works out good. Other than that, you pretty much need 3 people. One of the flaws with the boat, it's 8'7". If it was 2 feet longer and it maintained the same shape and curvature at the bottom, it would have a better release. I'm grateful I built the handles for it. I wanted the boat to be really unique and have kind of an industrial look and be really practical. And there's nothing worse than having to move a slippery, heavy, wet boat hull without a good firm grip. So the concept is that 4 people can each grab a corner on the bow and the stern, and they can walk the boat for a little ways, and it works out pretty good. So I think that's about it. Yeah.